convince me hiring a stranger wasn't a mistake.
I saved lives before. I only want to protect your grandson now.
Who let a stranger into my son's house?
Your mother hired me. Ask her if you have questions.
Security footage from that day still exists, Vanessa. That's not true. I really don't know what you mean.
Jada Mitchell held her breath the moment she saw it. A small silver bracelet rested on the glass table in the grand foyer, catching the morning light, and her whole body went cold. She knew that bracelet. She had held it in her own trembling hands 8 months ago, on the worst afternoon of a little boy's life. Now she stood inside the grandest house she had ever entered, her application papers shaking in her fingers, the marble floor cold beneath her worn shoes. She prayed that nobody in this house would ever recognize her face. Because if they did, the fresh start she needed so desperately would end before it had truly begun. Before we continue, if stories like Jada's move you, hit subscribe right now, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. This story is about to get a lot bigger. 3 days earlier, Jada had walked into a small staffing agency office wearing her only good blazer, the one she saved for funerals and job interviews. The recruiter barely looked up. The Kong family wants someone quiet. Someone who won't cause trouble, won't talk to the press, won't get attached. You understand. Jada understood more than the recruiter realized. She had spent 6 years as an emergency room nurse before her hours got cut, and 2 more years working double shifts at a diner to keep the lights on. She needed this position as a private companion for a lonely 6-year-old boy more than she had ever needed anything in her life. The Kong mansion rose out of the Empire City skyline like something from a magazine. Inside, a sharp-eyed housekeeper named Marta looked Jada up and down in the marble foyer. "You're the nanny candidate?" Marta's eyebrows lifted. "You don't look like the others we interviewed." "I'm not here to look like anyone else," Jada said, keeping her spine straight even as her stomach twisted. "I'm here to work, and I'm here to take care of that little boy." Marta's mouth pressed into a thin line, unconvinced, and led her deeper into the house, past staff who whispered behind their hands. Jada had felt small before. She refused to feel small today. Then Jada saw the boy. He sat curled into a window seat at the end of a long hallway, small and still, hugging his knees to his chest, staring out at a garden he clearly wasn't allowed to enjoy alone. "Ethan doesn't talk to strangers," Marta warned under her breath. But when Jada crouched down to his eye level and asked softly what his favorite color was, Ethan finally looked up, and something in his small, pale face made Jada's chest tighten painfully. She had seen that face before. Frightened, gasping, turning a color no child's face should ever turn, on a park bench 8 months ago, while she pressed her hands to his tiny chest and begged him, out loud, to breathe. She said nothing. Not yet. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure the whole house could hear it. Because across the room, resting on a glass side table like it belonged there, sat the very bracelet she had spent 8 long months wondering how she would ever find a way to return. An elegant older woman entered the room a moment later, moving with quiet, unshakable authority. This was Grace Kong, matriarch of the household, and the one who had personally selected Jada's application from a stack of 40 other candidates. "Miss Mitchell," Grace said, studying her with sharp eyes that seemed to miss absolutely nothing. "My son believes I have lost my mind. Hiring a complete stranger to care for his son. Convince me that I haven't." Jada swallowed hard and spoke from the heart instead of from her resume. She talked about why she had become a nurse in the first place, because once, years ago, help had arrived too late for someone she loved, and she had promised herself she would never let that happen again if she had any power to stop it. Grace's expression flickered, unreadable, thoughtful. "Interesting," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Very interesting indeed." That evening, David Kong came home from a 14-hour day to find a stranger sitting cross-legged on his living room floor, teaching his son how to fold a paper crane. He did not smile. "Who let this woman into my house?" he demanded, and the entire room went still around him. Jada rose to her feet slowly, chin lifted, refusing to shrink under the weight of his stare. "Your mother hired me, Mr. Kong," she said, steady despite the fear in her stomach. "If you have questions about that decision, I'd suggest you take them to her." David's jaw tightened visibly. He was not accustomed to being spoken to that way, and certainly not by someone his staff had already started dismissively calling just the nanny. Later that night, long after Ethan had been put to bed, David cornered his mother in the study. "You hired a woman off the street to watch my son, and you didn't think to tell me first?" Grace poured herself a cup of tea, entirely unbothered by his anger. "I hired the only candidate in that stack of 40 who looked at Ethan like a child, David, and not like an inconvenience or a headline waiting to happen." David's fists clenched at his sides. "You don't understand what is at stake here. After what happened at the park." His voice cracked just slightly, before he caught himself and forced it back under control. "I cannot lose him again. Not for 1 second. Not ever." Grace's eyes softened, the sharpness melting into something gentler. "Then trust me for once when I tell you. I believe this woman is exactly what Ethan needs right now. Perhaps what you need too." Down the darkened hallway, Jada had stopped mid-step, close enough to overhear every word. "What happened at the park?" Her pulse pounded so hard it hurt. She pressed her palm flat against the cool wall, forcing herself to breathe slowly, evenly, the way she once taught frightened patients to breathe. She had been so careful, so certain that no one would ever connect her to that terrifying afternoon. But standing in the shadows of this enormous house, hearing David Kang's controlled voice crack with old, unhealed fear, she finally understood, with total certainty, exactly whose son she had saved. If you've ever kept a secret to protect someone you love, comment, "I understand" below. Subscribe now because the truth is about to change everything for Jada. The next morning, Ethan tugged on the sleeve of Jada's cardigan and held up his small, empty wrist. "I lost my lucky bracelet," he whispered, eyes downcast. "Mommy gave it to me before she went to heaven. Daddy says I lost it at the park, the day I got really sick." Jada's throat closed so tightly she could barely answer. She had that bracelet. She had carried it hidden in the lining of her coat pocket for 8 months, too terrified to return it, because she had no way to explain where she had found it without unraveling everything she had built to protect herself and her family. "I bet it's somewhere safe," she finally managed, her voice trembling more than she wanted it to. Sometimes the things we think are lost forever are just waiting quietly for the right moment to come back to us. That night, alone in the small staff room at the far end of the house, Jada pulled the bracelet from its hiding place and stared at it under the lamplight. A tiny silver anchor charm caught the glow and threw small shadows across her hands. She remembered the panic of that afternoon on the park bench with painful clarity, the crowd gathering around her in a tight, frightened circle, her own hands pressing again and again against a small chest that would not move on its own. She remembered counting compressions under her breath, praying between numbers until finally, he gasped and coughed and breathed. She remembered slipping quietly away before anyone could ask her name, because paramedics had already taken over, and she had a shift waiting for her across town. She never imagined, not for one single second, that the boy on that bench would grow into the child she now tucked into bed every single night. Word spread quickly through the household staff that the new nanny had a gift with Ethan unlike anyone before her. He started eating full dinners again instead of pushing food around his plate. He stopped waking up crying in the middle of the night, calling for a mother who could no longer answer him. Grace watched it unfold with a small, satisfied smile, as though she had expected exactly this. Even David, despite every guarded instinct in his body, began seeking Jada out without meaning to, lingering a beat too long in doorways, softening in ways his staff had never witnessed. But not everyone in the house welcomed the sudden change. Vanessa Cole, David's polished business partner and the woman most of Empire City society already assumed he would eventually marry, watched Jada's rising place in the household with a tight, carefully painted smile. "She's certainly charming the boy," Vanessa said to David one evening, swirling the wine in her glass. "Careful, David. Poor women rarely climb this high by accident." David didn't answer her right away. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he found that he didn't fully agree with her either. One quiet, rain-soaked afternoon, David found Jada sitting alone in the garden, quietly crying while Ethan napped upstairs. "What's wrong?" he asked, surprising even himself with how much he genuinely meant the question. Jada wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be caught. "It's nothing really. I know exactly what people in this house think of me. The poor girl who got lucky. I'm not trying to take anything from your family, Mr. Kong. I only want to do right by your son." David sat down beside her on the wet stone bench, closer than he had originally intended. "My mother doesn't hire people by accident," he said quietly, watching the rain fall on the garden hedges. "And I don't trust people by accident either, not anymore. I don't fully understand it yet, but something about you feels familiar somehow. Like I already know you from somewhere I can't quite place." Jada's heart slammed hard against her ribs. She looked away quickly, out toward the wet garden, before he could see the truth written plainly across her face. "Maybe some people just feel familiar," she said softly, "because they're exactly where they're supposed to be." David studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, though neither said another word about it. The following week, Vanessa arrived at the mansion unannounced, 2 Kong Horizon Group board members trailing behind her, insisting on a full house inspection, for security purposes, ahead of the company's annual gala. While Jada was out walking Ethan through the park near the estate, Vanessa quietly searched the staff quarters herself, moving with the confidence of someone who already knew exactly what she was looking for. She found the small silver bracelet tucked carefully inside Jada's jewelry box. Vanessa's smile turned razor sharp. By the time Jada and Ethan returned, Grace and David were already waiting in the main hall, the bracelet sitting accusingly on the entry table between them like evidence at a trial. "Care to explain?" Vanessa said sweetly, folding her arms. "Why the nanny has been hiding Ethan's missing bracelet this entire time? The very same bracelet that disappeared the day he nearly died." The air seemed to leave the entire room at once. David's face turned to stone. "Jada," he said, his voice low and dangerously quiet, "is this true? Do not look away now. Like this video and subscribe, because the next few minutes reveal a truth none of them saw coming." Jada lifted her chin, done hiding, done shrinking, done protecting a secret that had never needed protecting in the first place. "Yes, I've had it since the day Ethan nearly died. Because I was the one who saved him." Gasps rippled through the hall like a wave. "I was on my lunch break at Liberty Fountain Park," Jada continued, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "I heard a woman screaming near the water. I ran over and found a little boy choking, turning blue, with no one watching him closely enough to notice in time." Her eyes cut, briefly but pointedly, toward Vanessa, whose confident smile finally visibly cracked. "I performed CPR until the paramedics arrived. His bracelet came loose during compressions. I picked it up off the ground to keep it safe, and then I left because I had a shift to catch, and I honestly never thought I would see that little boy again." Grace stepped forward then, calm as still water. "I know," she said simply. Every head in the room turned toward her at once. "I recognized her 3 months ago, from hospital intake records I quietly requested after the incident. I chose her file myself, David, out of 40 applicants. Not by accident. Not by luck. I wanted to see with my own eyes whether she would ever try to use what she did for this family to gain anything at all." Grace paused, letting the silence stretch. She never said a single word. Then she turned toward Vanessa, her voice suddenly ice cold. "Unlike some people, who were supposed to be watching my grandson that afternoon, and left him completely alone to take a phone call." Every eye in the room turned toward Vanessa. Her composure shattered instantly. "That is not, I don't know what she's talking about. This is..." "Security footage from the park still exists, Vanessa," Grace said quietly, cutting her off without raising her voice even slightly. "I've had a copy for months. I was simply waiting for the right moment to use it." David stepped toward Vanessa, his own voice low, flat, and completely final. "You let my son wander alone near open water while you took a business call that could have waited. And then you let an innocent woman get accused of theft, in my own home, to cover up your mistake." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed again, no clever words left anywhere to save her. Security quietly escorted her out of the Kong mansion that same afternoon. Her position at Kong Horizon Group terminated before the sun had even fully set. David turned back to Jada, his eyes glassy with something raw and completely overwhelming. "You saved my son's life, and you never told a single soul. You never once asked for anything in return." His voice broke slightly on the last word. "Why?" Jada wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Because saving him was never something I did for a reward, Mr. Kong, she said softly. It's just who I am. One more thing before we finish. Comment the word family if you believe love finds the people who deserve it. And don't forget to subscribe for our next story. Weeks later at the Kong Horizon Group's annual gala, David stood at the podium in front of the wealthiest, most powerful families in Empire City and told the true story of the woman who had saved his son's life. Not as a headline for the tabloids, not as a scandal to manage, but simply, finally, as the truth. He asked Jada to join him on the stage, and when she walked up in a simple navy dress instead of designer silk, the entire ballroom slowly rose to its feet. I spent 8 months quietly searching for the stranger who saved my son's life, David said, his voice steady now, sure of itself in a way it hadn't been in years. I never once imagined she would already be living under my own roof, folding his laundry, reading him bedtime stories, loving him completely without ever asking for a single thing in return. He turned to Jada, and in front of the entire room, he reached gently for her hand. I don't care what anyone in this room thinks about where you come from, Jada Mitchell. I only care about where you're standing right now beside my son, and beside me if you'll let me stand beside you too for good this time. Ethan came running up the steps and threw both arms tightly around Jada's waist, the small silver bracelet finally back on his wrist exactly where it belonged. Grace watched from the front row, quietly smiling to herself. Exactly the way a woman smiles when a plan she never once spoke aloud finally beautifully comes true. Jada Mitchell had walked into that enormous house looking only for a paycheck. She walked out of that ballroom having found an entire family who finally truly saw her, not for what she had, but for exactly who she was underneath it all. Some people save a life and quietly wait for the world to notice them for it. The right people save a life and simply walk away afterward, asking for absolutely nothing at all in return. That is the kind of love worth waiting 8 months or 8 years for. If this story touched your heart tonight, make sure you're subscribed to Empire City Romance Stories, because we bring you a brand new emotional drama just like this one every single week. Like this video right now, drop a comment telling us your favorite moment from Jada and David's story, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the very next story.